going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 265 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about another Hellboy book. This is Hellboy and the BPRD, 1953. This is, I guess, the second book in an ongoing series of minis that focus on Hellboy when he was quite a bit younger, when he was still a rookie in the BPRD. The first volume, 1952, was one 5-issue miniseries that was one story. This one is halfway a bunch of unconnected stories and halfway its own story that kind of acts as a sequel to 1952. The first half of this book, in a lot of ways, it felt like it could have been Hellboy Volume 10 or whatever. There were several volumes in the main Hellboy series that didn't really connect with what was going on in the present day and were just these short little stories that involved bits of mythology from around the world that Mike Mignola was a big fan of, and they didn't really have anything to do with Rasputin or any of the big mythological arc stuff that was going on in the present day in the Hellboy universe. There was one volume in particular that I remember where, like, one issue would be set in 1960 something, and then one issue would be set in the 70s, and one would be set in the 80s, and it was just these assorted stories from Hellboy when he was younger, fighting in various missions for the BPRD. And the first half of this book feels a lot like that. And then once you get into the second half, it's like, oh, okay, you're connecting those elements to what's going on here, and then all of this stuff in the second half of the book, it does connect quite a bit with what was going on in 1952. At one point, the agent, I can't remember her name, but she is the Asian agent. She has these flashes of telepathy where she can kind of sense things. She goes on this one mission with Hellboy in one of the kind of sort of unconnected stories, and then she's on the mission at the last half of the book that takes up roughly half of this book, and she has this vision of different things that are to come where Hellboy's fighting this one guy who's introduced here. She sees this, maybe it's a demon, maybe it's an idol. It looks a whole lot like the creature that appeared briefly in the 1952 story. So all of this is tied together, but when you first start reading this book, you're going to think that it doesn't tie together, and this is just assorted Hellboy stories that are set in the 1950s and don't really have anything to do with the threads that were set up in 1952. But we do get a continuation of quite a few of those threads. The little girl who's introduced in 1952, I'm assuming she was introduced there. She may have been introduced in like the BPRD or one of the other main Hellboy books that I haven't read, but I think she was introduced in 1952. She's the one who was talking to Professor Broom at the beginning of the 1952 story, and then we see that she's allied with some people that Hellboy is going to be fighting. We're not entirely sure how they are aligned. We don't know if they are evil or good. We do know that Hellboy will be fighting the guy with the tattoos all over him. He will be fighting that guy at one point, and it seems like maybe they're working with the Russians, and this being the early 1950s and Hellboy working for an American agency, that would make sense that they are aligned against each other, but one of them, who can turn into a wolf, she saves a little boy. So I'm not entirely convinced that these guys are 100% bad guys. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. This book also touches more on Hellboy's destiny of destroying the world. It gets a little bit more into that, so that's kind of cool. That some pretty major stuff concerning the Hellboy mythos is being touched on in what I would have thought is kind of a minor background series for Hellboy. But that's pretty cool. Overall, I like this book quite a bit. I like where this series of minis is going. I think there's at least one more that's set in 1954, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if there's any more after that. This all may conclude in 1954. I haven't looked any further, but unfortunately I don't have the 1954 volume with me right now. But I like this book. I definitely recommend it, and I would recommend just go ahead and check out 1954 if it's as good as 1953 and 1952. So those are my thoughts on this book. I hope that you guys liked this video, and tomorrow I will be back with a different Hellboy book to talk about. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will catch you later. Have a good one.